listen, everybody's fully healthy. If everybody's on the court, then the Clippers have to worry about two generational scoring talents. I think they do actually have the means to guard that. Even if the Nets decide to play Ben Simmons at center, like, the Clippers have all these forwards that can play a small ball five, so that's not really going to matter. Like, you have a Batum or a Robert Covington or a Marcus Morris that you could just play as your five if Ben Simmons is your five, and then boom, you just don't have an advantage if you're the Nets playing a guy like Ben Simmons at the center because the Clippers just have forwards that can guard him. I don't even know if Ben Simmons can play the five. Like, how are his screens going to be? How is he going to be on a roll and being able to bully people? So we also just haven't seen him. So I think he's just like a complete question mark. How is he even going to play, especially with these guys on a team he's never played on before? We do understand that KD and Kyrie are going to come on the court, and they're going to be guys you have to check, and that you have to devote one elite perimeter defender to at least on any given occasion. So a Kawhi Leonard could stick KD, and a Paul George could stick Kyrie Irving, and I think you're pretty well equipped for that. And then if you don't want your stars guarding them, you have other guys like Terrence Mann, like Batum, as I mentioned. Covington, as I mentioned. Those are two guys that could guard Kevin Durant, if need be. And then you still have guys like John Wall and Reggie Jackson who are like shot-creating guards that aren't going to be having to guard guys that are having the ball all game. Like, those guys are not going to be guarding Kyrie, I do not think. I just think there's too much onto the shoulders of KD, of Kyrie, to just create for the team that you won't be able to beat a team like the Clippers that is pretty much perfectly assembled to counter that, like with wing players that are adept at guarding and being able to switch. Like, you can switch on all these guys. You're not going to be able to run picks. Who the hell is setting picks on the Nets to run a pick and roll? Like, Nicholas Claxton is your pick and roll big, and Ben Simmons? That's not going to work. Suns Celtics is a really, really great one. So the Celtics got better in the offseason adding Malcolm Brogdon, and the Suns didn't get better. They didn't do anything in the offseason. They won 64 games last year and then got absolutely humiliated on a historic level. A level that we just hadn't witnessed before. That level of demoralization might not be possible to come back from it. We just have to see it. The Suns, the way that they respond from that will tell us all we need to know about their team. If this was just a fluke, if it was just that one game that doesn't really represent who they are, or if it is the game that represents exactly who they are. And based on what we know Chris Paul to be in the playoffs, Phoenix, I don't know. Celtics, they want to get back to the finals, and I just trust them more. Mavericks, Grizzlies, very interesting teams that are very similar because they're teams that are headlined by a super promising young player that both just lost to Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Now, fully healthy, I think the Grizzlies have more depth, even if they lost a couple players to free agency. John Morant, Dylan Brooks, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is still your four-man tandem. That is absolutely incredible. And I think that presents a pretty good template for guarding Luka Doncic, because a guy like Dylan Brooks is going to take that assignment and be super active, be super annoying, and just a complete pest on Luka Doncic and maybe annoy him to a level. And then a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. will be guarding. He will be playing center. Steven Adams will be played off the court in this series, so the Grizzlies will have to just find another wing player to play with these guys. Jaren Jackson Jr. will be guarding a JaVale McGee and therefore be kind of in the area to guard a Luka Doncic on a drive, and it just kind of helps stifle things at the rim. The problem with the Mavs is kind of in the same boat as it just was. Like, they're not going to have enough offensive contributors. It's going to come down to Luka just doing everything for the team. I know the Grizzlies don't exactly have a second offensive star, but guys like Bane, Brooks, and Jackson can each get their 15 to 20. And Luka, I mean, maybe Dimwitty can do that some nights he can. Some nights he definitely can't. And then Christian Wood is going to have to be a big contributor here, and Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to have to come back from injury. I don't think those three options are as strong as what the Grizzlies have as far as support for their star player. So because of that, I'm going to go Memphis. The Warriors are the team to beat right now. They absolutely are. Not just because they won, but because they won in a season where Klay was out for, half? I think it was more than half of the regular season. And he came back, and Steph was out for a bunch of that later part of the year and came back in the playoffs. They hadn't played together in years since Klay had initially gotten hurt, and they figured it out, and they just kind of ran through teams in the playoffs. And they have as good of a roster as they had last year and coming into a healthy new season, I mean, that's an upgrade from last year. So they're the team to beat. And the Lakers, they don't have enough shooting. They don't have enough defense. It's just the same shit, even with Anthony Davis. All right, it's the Bucks here. We saw these teams play each other, not in the most recent playoffs, but the year before, and the Bucks swept them. That was a really bad Jimmy Butler series. I think if these teams played again, Jimmy Butler would be a lot better, but Giannis is also 2 years farther into his development. The Heat are just not big enough. Like, getting rid of Tucker really makes this harder, even though if they had Tucker, it still wouldn't matter. Or it would matter, but it still wouldn't get them over the hump to beat the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis and Brook Lopez, Bam Adebayo can't guard both those guys. Like, Jimmy Butler would have to guard Giannis. Who else do you have that's big that can guard on the Miami Heat? I don't know. Like, you have Dwayne Dedmon and Omar Yurtseven. Did they pick up anybody that can guard 4s and 5s besides those guys? Like, they're just not big enough. They're not strong enough. It's just not going to work. You'd have the battle of the two best centers in the NBA, which would be a hell of a battle. But I'm taking Nikola Jokic over Joel Embiid. If Jamal Murray comes into this series and he's popping off like he was in the bubble, you're going to have to put Matisse Thybulle on him. And if you put Matisse Thybulle into the game, that makes your offense a lot worse. Now all of a sudden the Nuggets only have to guard 4 guys. And a guy like Michael Porter Jr., who might be a defensive liability, can just hang out and guard Matisse Thybulle, just be a help guy, and they won't have to worry about his deficiencies in that end at all. Nikola Jokic guarding Joel Embiid one-on-one, it's not going to be as much of a cakewalk for Joel Embiid to score as you might think. Now, the Nuggets don't really have an amazing perimeter defensive player. That's their biggest downfall. I don't know who they would put on a James Harden. I don't know who they would put on Maxey and Tobias Harris. Those guys, I mean, there might be no limit to how much they could score in a given night against a team like the Nuggets. But the Sixers, they're cursed or something. They run into a problem. I guess this is the problem with doing this bracket, is just where you're assuming Joel Embiid is just going to be healthy. And that is an assumption that you can't really just make. So I guess if Joel Embiid's healthy, they have a better team. I mean, Aaron Gordon would have to guard James Harden, I think. You know what? I'm going to go with the Sixers. You just got P.J. Tucker and DeAnthony Melton. And these are good role guys that can play with your core group of Maxey, Harden, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid. I think you just have more on both sides of the ball in terms of support around your superstar player than the Nuggets. Even if Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. are healthy, you might have Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. First of all, who knows how good they're going to be, but also Aaron Gordon, who's not necessarily an offensive outlet. I mean, he can kind of give you something on a catch-and-shoot 3, maybe an offensive rebound here and there, but he's not like a go-to player by any means. Who are your players around these guys? Like, it's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope starting at that 2. Who else do you have on your team that's going to contribute and be, your off-the-bench role players? I think Philly is probably better equipped in that area than the Denver Nuggets, at least at this point. So I think as far as depth goes, Philly wins. And because of that, I guess I'll just go with Philly. I don't know. We got a finals rematch. Even though the Celtics added Malcolm Brogdon, I do not think Malcolm Brogdon is the difference. I don't think he moves the needle. In a series against the Golden State Warriors, you replay the finals last year and you just all of a sudden have Malcolm Brogdon. I don't think he moves the needle to the point where you would flip the result of this series. So I'm going to go Golden State Warriors, especially with a healthy Klay coming in next year. And not only that, but Jordan Poole, another year of his development, I think he's going to get even better. So Golden State Warriors have a full year for their big 3 or for their just core team to kind of gel more and build themselves up, and they have all the experience in the world. I mean, how can you pick against them? Especially if you're a team like the Celtics that demonstrated that you couldn't beat them. Okay, sorry, that was too quick, but I take the Bucks over the Cavs, even with this Cavs new team. About that one, I would just say experience matters too much. A guy like Jrue Holiday has the potential to completely neutralize guards like Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland. One of those guys is going to have to deal with Jrue Holiday, and the other guy will have to deal with maybe an easier workload going up against a Wesley Matthews or a Pat Connaughton or a Chris Middleton. But still, like, your 4-5 duo of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, I just don't think they'd be able to generate enough points to counter the Milwaukee Bucks going inside against the Giannis Brook Lopez front court duo, especially if you have a guy like Jrue Holiday harassing Darius Garland all game, making it harder for him to get into his pick and rolls, harder for him to get his sets going. Now, we got the Clippers against the Grizzlies. I don't think Dillon Brooks is big enough to guard Kawhi Leonard. I think that's what it comes down to. Like, you do not have a guy to guard Kawhi Leonard. The Clippers might not have a guy to guard Ja, but they certainly have that team defense. This would be a Ja Morant ISO show because if you're getting into pick and rolls and you're running plays to get switches, like you're going to get a switch for Paul George or Kawhi Leonard on him or Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington. Like, I don't think you want that switch as the Memphis Grizzlies. You would rather him... I think Paul George would check him from the get-go, and then you would just go against that. But I just don't really see your advantage on the offensive end for the Memphis Grizzlies going up against the Clippers team that's fully stacked and fully loaded. Like, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are just too tall and too big. They're just going to be able to shoot over you and get to their shots, I think, in a better, more easier manner than your Ja Morant. All right, Bucks Warriors. This might very well may be the NBA Finals next year. And Draymond would have to check Giannis. I don't know if Draymond has that in him. And obviously it would be a team job. You need to bring help to guard Giannis. But now the Bucks have even more shooting. Because if you have Chris Middleton playing, that's one thing. But you add Joe Ingles. You already have Grayson Allen and Jrue Holiday. Bobby Portis. These are real floor spacers around Giannis. That's literally the perfect team you can build. And on the other end of the court, Jrue Holiday. Yeah, no one can shut down Steph Curry and stop him from being effective. But Jrue Holiday can probably do as good of a job as anybody. He is the type of guy you want guarding a Steph Curry. But even as you saw last year, Marcus Smart, he wasn't able to slow down Steph Curry. So maybe Steph Curry can just get his regardless. Doesn't matter who's guarding him. But it's just the other end of the court. The reason the Golden State Warriors were able to take that series away from the Celtics is because they could take advantage of their youth, their lack of execution ability under pressure, just IQ in certain spots where they were being mentally overridden by the Golden State Warriors, and the Celtics just couldn't score the basketball. You had Jason Tatum in the chamber, Andrew Wiggins having him in a prison cell, and I just don't see that happening with a team like the Milwaukee Bucks that's just not as heliocentric, that's not as reliant on one player just being an isolation god. Like, the Bucks can get their offense in so many different ways. You can use Jrue Holiday or Chris Middleton or Giannis to get their own shot, but also just moving the ball around and finding the best shot for whoever. Regardless of how good Draymond Green can play defense, it's Giannis. And I think Giannis, with that team around him, hard to better than anybody else. Sixers, Clippers. Now, the Clippers don't have an amazing big man at all in Zubac. That's probably their weakness of their team, even if it's him or whoever they're playing. I don't even know who their backup center is. They need to match Zubac's minutes with Embiid, but Zubac has to be able to contain Embiid. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. But he's a big body, and being a big body, all he needs to do is just play defense. Doesn't need to do anything else on the court. And then guys like Kawhi and Paul George can just go to work. PJ Tucker is going to be working his ass off trying to stop Kawhi from scoring. Who's going to be guarding Paul George? It's going to be Tobias Harris. That's hard to say. And then you also still have to worry about John Wall and Reggie Jackson. These are other guys that are going to be looking to get their own shots. So I think Zubac will, he will get 30 scored in him every single game by Embiid, but I don't think you necessarily need to bring help defender because Zubac is tall, he's strong, and he'll give up some buckets to Embiid. You say let him get his, as long as you limit everybody else from scoring. I think Kawhi and Paul George and company can definitely do that, so I'm going to go with the Clippers. We've seen Giannis versus Kawhi in the playoffs 2019 when the Raptors took it all. And the Clippers have a similarly stacked team to that Raptors team where they have a team built around Kawhi Leonard that is good enough if he is that level of player. And we are assuming in this scenario that Kawhi Leonard is Kawhi Leonard, that we know, that we understand as that playoff performer. And the Milwaukee Bucks team does not have a guy, an individual, who can take him and neutralize him to their best of their ability, to the best that a team can really take him out of the game. Giannis Antetokounmpo in a one-on-one against Kawhi is not keeping him from 30 points because he's not that level of perimeter defensive player on a guy with guard abilities. Now, when you get into the paint and when you get a driver and help defense and whatnot, that's where Giannis is his all-defense self. But they don't have a guy. It's going to be Chris Middleton guarding Kawhi Leonard, and Chris Middleton is not strong enough to keep Kawhi Leonard from getting to his zone, to getting from his spaces on the floor, and his comfort zone in that mid-range, which he will get to and he will score from that position. Now, on the other side of the court, who do the Clippers have that can guard Giannis? Like, it would be Kawhi. It would be Kawhi or a Batum or a Covington or maybe a Morris, right? And Giannis is just he's going to be himself. It's not like he's going to get locked up by these guys. Even Kawhi Leonard, Kawhi is smaller than Giannis. So if Giannis has deep position in the paint, he still had an advantage in that one-on-one situation. It's the ability to drive from the perimeter into the paint that he might have a little bit more struggles with if he's going up against some of these elite front court wing defensive players. Zubac at the rim is not a slouch as a paint protector, but he's not the greatest guy. He's not the greatest. I mean, he's not Brook Lopez even, who's going to be on the other end of the court, which will limit guys from driving inside. Jrue Holiday by himself can take Reggie Jackson out of the game. He can take John Wall out of the game. Whoever he's guarding, they're really not probably going to be much of a factor. Now, Chris Middleton will probably be neutralized if Kawhi is guarding him. Even Paul George will give him fits. And Chris Middleton's the guy that the Bucks need to hit these key shots in certain spots to maybe halt a run, to get them out of a rut, break that lid on the basket down the stretch of the game when things get really physical. Who's going to be able to dribble, create a jump shot? I don't think the Clippers would actually have Kawhi on Giannis until maybe the end of the game. You would probably have Kawhi guarding a Chris Middleton and Paul George guarding a Jrue Holiday, and you'd put Reggie Jackson on a Wesley Matthews, Pat Connaughton, Grayson Allen, whoever that other guy is, Joe Ingles, that's out there playing the 2. That way you could put a Morris or a Batum or a Covington at the 4 to guard Giannis. They might get shit on, but at least you have those other bases covered. You have a great defender guarding Holiday, you have a great defender guarding Chris Middleton, and Zubac and Lopez are your big men matching up. And maybe Zubac can play Lopez to a point where they're kind of matching each other, even though Lopez will be a more effective defensive shot blocker guy that's keeping guys from entering the paint. On that other end of the court, I don't think that the Bucks necessarily have as good of perimeter defenders to counter the Los Angeles Clippers besides Jrue Holiday, who will be on Paul George, maybe even on Kawhi Leonard, or maybe he's on Reggie Jackson or John Wall, just taking them out of the game. Whoever he's on, he will be keeping them from being their best self. In the end, I think that will just leave the Clippers with too much, regardless. If you have Kawhi Leonard or Paul George, one of those guys is occupied by Jrue Holiday, I mean, you still have the other guy. And I think Kawhi Leonard, as a perimeter scorer, I don't see anybody stopping him from getting his shots. And you could say that about Giannis, that no one will stop him from getting his shots. I just think that the Clippers have the most around their superstar to create the most well-rounded team that is capable of stopping people and being able to help out their star. Because I do think that that defensive wing depth is just going to be killer. It's going to be able to keep a guy like Giannis from going everywhere he wants, being able to make those passes to exactly where he wants, where he can get a shooter with a spot-up shot. Like that, those, whatever 5 the Clippers has on the court is probably going to be a ton of length that's going to be able to move and cover those bases and keep guys from just being shooters and just spacing the floor and doing nothing else, which the Bucks have a few guys like that. They're just out there to shoot, and if you can force them off the three-point line, they're just not going to be as effective, not going to be able to utilize that spacing necessarily. So, hopefully that makes sense. Obviously, this matchup would be insanely close, and it could totally go either way, but I think at this point, like, if the Clippers have their whole team, then that's basically the premise of this, is the fact that these teams, regardless of what you know of their injury histories, like, in this scenario, it's a 7-game series. The Bucks have Chris Middleton, they have Giannis, they have Jrue, they have everybody on their team. And then the Clippers have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, everybody on their team as well. We're not talking about who's injury prone and who's not, it's just who's on the court. So that's your winner of the NBA Finals next year. I'm the prophesizer. And, in 9 months, when the Clippers win the championship, you can come back to this video and you can see why it happened. So that's going to do it, guys.